right, hello everyone. Welcome to the May Azure Infrastructure Partner Community Call. Thanks for joining. We'll actually be having a conversation over deployment planning tools in regards to Azure Site Recovery. Just some house cleaning items. If you can hear me today, if you can tell me what type of phone device you have, whether it's Android, Windows, or iOS. And if you could just type that in the message window. Great. Okay, awesome. I do see some messages coming in, so that's good news. If anybody has audio issues during the call, feel free to dial into the bridge, and I've included that in the message window as well. I do want to note that this call is being recorded, so if anybody has issues with being recorded, this would be a good time to drop. We will record the call and post it in the Yammer community within the next 2 to 3 days. So you'll still be able to digest the content that way. Lastly, before we get started, I do want to ask for the June partner community call, if there's any subjects that you would want to hear about, if you could please list that in the message window, and you can post that throughout the call. So if something comes up during the call and you think it might be a good subject for June and or later community calls, we'll take that into consideration and make sure that these calls are relevant to you as a partner community. Lastly, feel free to post questions in the message window, and we will take breaks during the presentation to answer those questions. So at this point, I want to introduce Ron Daly from the Global Black Belt Hybrid Management Team to discuss ASR Deployment Planner. It's all yours, Ron.
Thanks, Willie. Sorry. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you might be. Thanks for joining the call today. As Willie said, my name is Ron Daly, and I'm part of our Hybrid Management Black Belt team. And really, our focus is on the OMS suite all up, and the solutions that are part of that suite. And one of the key areas that we do cover is the topic that we're talking about today, which is Azure Site Recovery, which we shorten by the term ASR. So ASR is a solution, a tool that we use for business continuity and disaster recovery for protecting workloads that are running in your data center or in other clouds. So let's say, for example, you are running virtual machines that are instantiated upon VMware or Hyper-V. We leverage the capabilities of Azure Site Recovery to replicate those virtual machines over into Azure, shut down, and available for you when you, in the case of a disaster, materializing. So today, our focus here today is on the ASR deployment planning tool for the VMware scenario. And before we start talking about the tool itself, I just wanted to take a step back and talk about how the solution is architected, how ASR is architected for VMware, and how do we get your workloads up into the cloud. So simply put, the solution leverages some key components, and that key component is an appliance that sits inside your VMware data center running on one of your ESXi hosts. And that machine manages the replication of your VMware VMs, up into Azure. So that machine is what is known as a config/process server. And basically what it does, it is used for caching and compressing and encrypting your workloads and replicating them over into the cloud. And we give it the name config server because it's a centralized management appliance, for the workloads that need to be replicated. So when we enable protection, for your workloads that are sitting on VMware, we push a small mobility service or a small agent on your virtual machines. It's a splitter driver that captures in-memory writes and replicates those writes to the management server, and then the management server replicates them over into Azure storage. And all of that is done securely, over a secure data channel, whether you're doing over Express Route or you're doing it over the internet via TLS. We more commonly known as SSL or over 443, into Azure storage. Shutdown, as I said, are available for you to execute a disaster recovery, process, when in the case of a disaster, right? Or if you want to test your disaster recovery plan. So before I move on to talk about some of the concerns when you start to look at preparing your workloads for either migration or protection from a disaster recovery point of view, I just wanted to know if anyone has any questions, about this solution, or if everybody's pretty comfortable and have heard about ASR before.
Thanks, Ron. I think from the partner community side, we actually had a couple calls here in the previous months around ASR as well as OMS.
Okay.
So I think they, the partner community as a whole has a good understanding of the solution.
All right, awesome. All right, so let's talk about protecting workloads in Azure from a disaster recovery point of view. And some of the key challenges that exist, why it's important for us to consider the functionality of disaster deployment planning tool, I should say. So before you can begin to protect, your VMware virtual machine using Azure Site Recovery, one of the things that you have to ensure is that there's enough bandwidth based on your daily change rate to ensure that you can meet the desired RPO, right? For your environment. So some of the common things that happen or ended up, causing customers not to start on the right footing around doing ASR or deploying ASR in an infrastructure is lack of understanding of some key things. So first of all, there is a disk size limitation in Azure. So if you have workloads or virtual machines in general that have disks greater than a terabyte, there might be a challenge, replicating those virtual machines over into Azure. There are some workarounds that you have to do to ensure that we can identify each individual disk as a disk that is, 123 gigabytes or less. And then supported OS versions. One of the key ones that we can call out is that from a disaster recovery point of view on VMware using ASR, 2003 is not supported. The mobility service can only be deployed upon machines that are running 2008 R2 SP1 and above. And then, what are your key infrastructure components? Because we're doing what we call near synchronous replication, and it's very, very important for us to be able to ensure that we meet your RPOs. There are some things that you have to consider. What's the network bandwidth, right? Is there available bandwidth to replicate your data up into the cloud? What are the Azure resources that you're going to need? Does your subscription have enough cores, or to replicate to run your virtual machines when they fail over into the cloud? And what are the storage account concerns that are important? So you need to be able to create the right number of target storage accounts, right? There's in Azure there's either standard or premium storage account, and depending on a key component in your environment, which is your change rate and the IOPS of your virtual machine, it will depend. It will depend what storage account you'll place your workloads in to meet the necessary performance criteria that you have, running in the cloud. So some other key things is we do assessment to find out some key components in your environment. So to ensure that you're right size for when you're running in Azure. So we look at what we call a compatibility assessment. So are your VMs eligible let me just switch over to the next slide. The deployment planner is a tool that the product team came up with to kind of identify some key things to ensure that you can protect your workload successfully in the cloud. So we're first of all looking at compatibility assessment. Are your VMs eligible, based on the number of disks, right, and the disk size and IOPS, churn rate, and the boot type, whether they are EFI boot or BIOS-based boot to run in Azure. We don't support EFI in Azure. And then, as I said earlier, the estimated network bandwidth that is required for what we call delta replication. So initial seeding is where we write what is on disk, and then we replicate that up into Azure storage. And then your changes that are running on your virtual machine, the mobility driver, capture those, replicates those into Azure storage, and then we push those changes up into Azure to make a recovery point. That's your delta changes. And then your network bandwidth, we need to calculate that first on versus the required RPO that you're looking at, right? So does the bandwidth that you have available, will that allow you to meet the required RPO value? What is the throughput that is available from your management server up into, or from on-premise generally into Azure? And then also the number of VMs that you can replicate in a batch to determine complete initial replication within a reasonable amount of time. Then we also need to, as I said, look at the Azure infrastructure component. So we kind of talk about those already, how many VMs you'll require and how many cores that will be required if you are to fail over or completely migrate into Azure, the storage account types, and that type of information. So this deployment planning tool is a key component in helping you to start on the right foot to ensure that when you do DR planning and when your customers are looking at leveraging ASR, you can prescriptively give them guidance as to, hey, we need to have these components in place, before we can start protecting VMware virtual machines, with Azure Site Recovery. All right. Any questions on this material before we move into kind of demo and talk about how we actually get this environment set up?
Hi, Ron. Let me see. We just had one question come in. Actually, a couple now. Oh, no questions at this point. Sorry.
Okay, cool. No worries. All right. So currently, ASR is in private preview. We're just on just about to do a new deployment in the Azure platform, and it will become generally available just around the end of June timeframe. So it is a small application that you can go out. And we'll share the link, following this call. If you haven't seen this before, you can go out and you can download a deployment planner. It's a zip file, and you can simply. So if you go to this blog, it carries you directly to the ASR documentation out on Azure Docs, and you can download the planning tool and extract the zip file, and then you can from there you can start using it to start checking out your virtual machines that you want to protect. Now, the first thing you want to be able to do is have a machine that you're going to run the deployment planner against. Now, from a simple point of view, what I usually recommend is that the machine that or the virtual machine that you're going to run the deployment planner from, you want to be probably the same machine that you're going to be using for your config server or your management server, as the case may be, inside your deployment. So basically, you want to have a machine that has about 8 virtual CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, there's about 300 gigs of hard drive, a machine that you'd use to do an ASR POC. You need to have the .NET framework. You need to also have the vSphere CLI 6.0, R3, or at least R2 and above, to deploy on the machine. And you need to also have Visual C redistributable deployed on the machine. some other key components. This machine needs to be able to have access, internet access. You need to have an Azure storage account so we can test throughput to the Azure storage account. And then we also want to ensure that you can generate a report from this machine. So you need to install Excel, minimum Excel 2013 on this box also. The other thing that you also need is that you need to have read-only permissions on in your vCenter, your ESXi infrastructure too, because we use that to read computer or machine information, from the environment. So if you look at this, the same link that I'm showing you here on the screen, if you go under the requirements section, you'll see the core machine requirements, the core components that you need on the machine that you're going to be running profile from. So it's the next thing that you want to do after you've downloaded the deployment planner, and you extract that to a folder on your machine. So already here I have that extracted on my box, all right? Then the next thing you want to do is connect to your vCenter infrastructure to get because we want to generate a list of machines that we want to profile. And the easiest way to do it is by PowerC Live. We can connect to our machine. We can do by IP address. And in my environment, I have right here ESXi host with a number of virtual machines running on it that time. I'm going to make I'm going to profile for protection. So input the IP address of my ESX. In my case, I'm going directly to the ESXi host. And then I'm going to put in my credentials so that I can, grab I can then, generate a list of machines that I want to profile. So this is just connecting me to my machine. And then I just want to go ahead and use get VM command to generate a list of machines that I'm going to profile, right? So let's call that VM list 2, right? I go here and I go look in my directory. I should see a list of virtual machines. This is a text file with a list of the virtual machines that I want to profile. So I have a few virtual machines on my environment, and this is just about think about 20 something virtual machines that I'm going to profile in this environment. I need to clean up this list and remove that header there. Remove the blank line from my environment, and then we save this text file because we're going to execute at a command prompt a process of profiling the virtual machines, that we want to prepare for deployment planning in our environment. So after I've done that, what I did, we also, let's say you have multiple runs that you're doing. I created a deployment planning folder for each host that I'm profiling. So here I've created this folder, and this is my profiling data for each ESXi host that I'm profiling. So in this case, my ESXi host is called SVC BCDR07, and here is the list of virtual machines that copied over that I'm going to be profiling in that environment. Okay. All right. So let's minimize this for a moment. So the deployment planning tool has basically three processes or three things that it can do. You can do profiling, and profiling is basically a process of, identifying the machines, see, what their capabilities are. Well, not necessarily capabilities, what their deployment type are. So whether they are not, how much memory, the specifications, I should say, my apologies. how much memory, how much RAM is on that virtual machine. And then also we are looking at the key IOPS of that virtual machine and the change rate on that virtual machine. So we can do this. We run this against the listed virtual machines. It doesn't impact the VMs, the running VMs themselves, because it doesn't affect the performance of these production VMs because there's no direct connection between them, right? We're reading this information is collected from your vCenter or the ESXi host. So there's no direct connection or communication to the virtual machines, right? So to do that, the first thing we want to do is we open a command prompt and we go to the deployment planner folder, right? And then we start off by running ASR deployment planner operation start profiling, which is to profile my virtual machines. It has 3 switches: start profiling, generate report, and get throughput. So we point it to my my ESXi host in this case, or it could be your vCenter appliance. Then I specify the directory, where my data, my profiling data is going to sit. And then from that, I also pointed to the VM list file, which is a list of virtual machines that I'm profiling. Then the other switch, the final switch, is a number of days that we want to profile the virtual machines for. Now, in this scenario, the number of days profile is a very, very important switch, because what it tells you is it is looking at your workloads, and you're determining over a period to get a best understanding or a best profile of your environment as to what your workload would be or would be required to be when it's running in Azure. So our recommendation is that you profile machines no less than 15 days, but as a best practice, you probably want to do 30 days to get a good picture, of the workloads, that you're preparing for protection in ASR. So if you're just testing the tool out, you can use it to profile the virtual machines at a minimum of half an hour. So in this case, I have set my virtual machines to profile, for an hour. So if I hit enter here, right, it's going to ask me for a username again, for my vCenter infrastructure. And then, you can the user and password are switches inside the command, but, obviously for security purposes, you can enter this at every time, at the time, you're going to actually execute this run. All right. So let's enter my password. So once I enter my password, it will start to do a number of prerequisite checks to identify, can it talk to the ESXi host? Can it talk to the virtual machines that it want to profile? And then it will start, the process of probably enter the wrong password. We'll do this again. Password, enter. Okay, great. So it's validating the VMs that it's profiling. Basically, what it's doing here is looking at, can I read the data about each virtual machine? Are any of the virtual machines off? Obviously, if they're off, I can profile, performance or churn on those VMs. So it goes out, it looks at the list that we created, and it checks to validate I can, get that information back from my ESXi host vCenter infrastructure. All right, so while that's going, taking another pause. Any questions?
Hi, yes, we actually had a few questions come in.
Sure.
So I'll go ahead and start at the top of the list there. Can you discuss the targeted timelines for increasing the 1 terabit disk support? Terabyte disk, which, as, and
That's a
then I
good
guess
question.
the add-on there, are you targeting an increase to 4 terabytes? And when would it be available for public preview and then for GA?
Yeah. So well, I don't know if, well, is is this an NDA discussion? I don't know. I mean, you know, just say, well, let me stay connected to the Azure Storage blog at a minimum. The tentative timeline is sometime, throughout the summer um, time frame. So the second part of H2. And then, as the question was around 4 terabyte size, ASR will support replicating to 4 terabytes in as soon as that's available.
Okay, thanks. And then another question is, when the planner runs, what kind of load does it put on the host?
So it doesn't put a load on the host because it's already, so all your performance metrics, your IOPS, that type of information is already available, especially in vCenter. So we're just reading those logs basically, right? We're getting all that information from your already deployed infrastructure, right? So we're not generating any new report. We're not turning on anything that's not available already in VMware.
Okay, gotcha. And regarding, I know it's in preview right now, but regarding getting support for the tool, when generating
Yeah.
a report, is the best way to just open up an Azure support ticket?
Yeah, well, because it's in public preview now, it is supported. Um, so you can get support for it. So it was in private preview, but it has gone to public preview. So support is available for items in public preview.
Okay. And one last one. This one's a specific use case. On a 1 hour profiling session for testing,
Yes.
I ran the ASR deployment planner.exe operation generate report. It ran for over 20 minutes without completing. Um, the logs indicated that it was a bandwidth calculation, required bandwidth 2.1 meg, RPO equals 60 minutes, percentile equals 90. Um, with it not completing, was there a switch that should have been used? And this might be more of a support ticket.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
probably that one we probably need to take offline and
Okay. Yep.
we can get back at that one. All right, so hopefully this connects. I hope my environment is a shared infrastructure. I hope there is nobody trying to shut it down at this time. But all right, so while that's running, let's look at another switch that we can use. So the other switch is to get throughput, from the environment. So why is this important? Because again, you're gonna be using the available bandwidth that you're in your environment to replicate your virtual machines, into the cloud. Now, the way ASR works is that it will use as much bandwidth as it finds. You can, but you can also throttle the management server. So you can go into the registry and make some changes, and also you can go into so one of the things that and let me show you that. Well, we go here. So if you go to the backup tool, right? So if you go to the Azure Backup tool is installed also on your management server that you're going to use for replication. If you go into properties configuration, you can specify the amount of bandwidth that's available, for ASR. It's the same thing, for Azure Backup also. So you can specify here how much bandwidth is available, and you can specify also how many threads ASR uses for replication by going into the registry, right? But in general, it will use as much bandwidth as it finds available. So one of the things when we are profiling, we also need to understand exactly, what our bandwidth looks like. So this other operation running the deployment planner is the operation get throughput. Again, pointing to the data that we want to replicate, the virtual machines in our VM list file. And then there are two key things that we need. We need to have a storage account, just a standard storage account in Azure that we will target this get throughput against. So basically what is happening here is that the deployment planner tool is going out, is looking at the virtual machines that you want to replicate. It writes a number of canary files based on the number of disks that are on the virtual machines, right? Because again, remember, we're going to be doing delta replication. And we want to see, based on, our throughput, based on, those canary files, how quickly can we write them to Azure and, delete them? So this is a command. I need my storage account and I need a storage account key as identified here. And then I hit enter and it goes out. What you'll see happening in my folder is that it goes out and creates a number of canary files, right? 64 megabit files, and then it's going to replicate them up to Azure just to verify, whether or not we can write. Well, it does two things to see if there is any blockage in us writing, into the cloud. So if the necessary ports are open on this management machine, and then it will come back and give us the amount of bandwidth that's available, in my environment. Right, so it's uploading the files to an Azure storage account that I specified inside my command, and then once that's done, it will give us the necessary bandwidth that is available for environment replicating into the cloud. And this is very, very important. If you're working on projects with customers around available bandwidth, they'll tell you, they have, I don't know, 10 gig pipes or whatever, or 100 gig pipe or whatever, whatever the case may be. But this helps you to calculate the throughput from this box. So, they might be on a network or a VLAN in the environment that there's multiple hops, out to the internet. That information is important, right? So you'll notice my bandwidth is 542 megabits, right? Obviously, I'm, in some, in a well, quote unquote, connected environment, so to speak. But this is very, very important, as I said, right? Because this helps you to determine, can I actually, the RPO that they're looking for, can I actually meet it? Do they have the available bandwidth to meet the RPO, that they're looking for? So the next thing that you want to do after your data is collected is go ahead and run the ASR deployment planner.exe/generate report. And what that does for you is once the data is completely collected, it goes about reading the data and generates an Excel spreadsheet, from the data that you put in. So with the generate report command, there are a number of, let me give you an example here. Let's pop this up. Let's take a look at this and talk about it a little bit. So here's my just made it a little bigger so you guys can see it. All right, so this is the generate report command. So once my data has been completed profiling, right? Again, I run the ASR deployment plan.exe operation, generate report, point it to my data, and then a key value is this desired RPO. So my RPO being, and I think most folks on the call probably are familiar, my recovery point objectives to determine exactly, how, what is from a recovery point of view, right? um, where can I recover my applications to, right? So or what's the minimum amount of data, quote unquote, data loss, that I will pertain or accept, I should say. So that is I can specify my desired RPO in generating the report, and if you don't specify a desired RPO value, we default to 30 minutes, right? So again, as I said, this is your recovery point objective, for your environment. So once you generate that, then it produces this Excel report for you. And what you'll see in this report is a number of key components. You'll see the total number of virtual machines profiled, so the total number of VMs whose profile data is available. We'll see two key components also, which is the compatible VMs list. So based on the prerequisites for Azure Site Recovery, whether or not the machines are greater than 1 terabyte, if it's a 2003 machine, stuff like that, right? Do I have, does the machine meet the necessary churn rate, for Azure, the throughput for an Azure storage account? Then it will tell you whether or not the machine sits in your compatible or incompatible list. And then we will see our desired RPO to the right. And inside this report, you can also change the RPO value, to see what it reflects, for your environment, right? So let's stay at 15 minutes for the moment, right? Now, once you run the report, right, what you see also inside this report is your required network bandwidth. Again, another a key component, to do DR. So when you look at this report, it tells you how much bandwidth you need to meet your recovery point objectives 100% of the time. So if we're looking at this report, it tells me that I need to have 168 megabits consistently available to meet that RPO. If we will allow for RPO misses, right? You will so let's say a 10% value, we need to have a minimum of 105 megabits available, right? So to meet this RPO percentage, right? For whatever the reason, right? If you set the bandwidth to 105 megabits, right? We will guarantee that you'll be able to meet that. And we show that graphically, the RPO value violations, if you had any violations, over that profiling period. So again, we summarize that information for you. As he said, so in this case, we're saying, what if you provision your lower bandwidth to 105 megabits? You can achieve those 15 minutes RPO 90% of the time, and you'll have, we tell you how many RPO violations that you'd have. Now, the other key value here is your achieved throughput, and this is where we ran the get throughput command, right? So what it tells you here is that the throughput from the server on which you're running the get throughput command to the Azure region where the storage account that I ran it against was located, and it's really an estimation, right, of what you can achieve, from a throughput point of view to protect the compatible VMs using site recovery. So as a recommendation point of view, going with your customers so that they don't have any, RPO violations, one of the things that you want to do is that you want to recommend them to set their bandwidth to meet the RPO values 100% of the time. So there's no potential for RPO violations, right? So what that points to, and if they have any questions around, what could be causing, quote unquote, challenges or violations, you want to look to see if there's any network QoS appliances that are limiting your throughput. You also want to see the storage characteristics, on the source side. Should you move your virtual machine your management server to use SSDs versus, HDD disk, if you're doing a virtual machine. And then also you can increase the bandwidth, as I said, on the management server, by increasing the throttling or turning off throttling on the management server itself, or you can increase the number of threads that the management server uses. And then we also, in this pane, we summarize the number of storage accounts you need when you fail over into Azure. How many cores will you need if you fail over all these 150 virtual machines into the cloud? The other thing that we tell you, which is very important, because there's a maximum number of cores that we have per subscription, and you just need to make a call into Azure support, and you'll get that increased. Now, on the input page, which is basically a summary of this information, it tells you, how long I was profiling for, the number of profile virtual machines, the number that was compatible, the number of disks, the average number of disks per compatible machine, the average disk size, the total data to be replicated in gigs, the desired RPO, the desired bandwidth that you inputted, and the typical data churn. So what does your churn rate look on a daily basis for all the virtual machines that you're protecting? Now, this value is very important. And why it's important is it will determine how many configuration servers do we need. So as a best practice recommendation, we identify that if you have data churn, so the change on all your workloads together, if you have greater than 2 gigabytes of change per day, add an additional configuration server. So that you're not having missing RPO violations, or you're having what we call delta resynchronization issues, right? Because if my management server cannot keep up with the rate that data is being sent to it and sending that data into Azure, then I'm going to go into resynchronization issues and potentially miss my RPO values. The other thing is that if I'm protecting more than 600 disks, right, on any configuration server, we recommend that you go to at least a second configuration server in the environment. Right. So here again, same information on the report. One of the key things that we need to know is how many, when you're seeding your components to Azure. So you're going to start initial replication in batches of how many should you replicate them. So we have ASR has a timeout window of 72 hours if initial replication is not completed. So based on your allocated bandwidth of 150 megabytes, right, or megabits, you want to ensure, we're saying based on what we have, the checks that we have done, and the average detected VM size, you should replicate your virtual machines in batches of 47 to ensure that there's no timeout, on the initial replication. Initial replication means basically when I go into Azure and I enable replication, as I said, we need to do an initial copy of what is on disk into my Azure storage account. Once I have set that baseline, then I start to do delta replications, in the sense that whatever is written in memory, that is also written instantly to my management server, and the management server replicates that up into Azure. And you can see, from a report here, also, if I want to increase or decrease those batches, based on available bandwidth, it tells you, what the batch sizes are to ensure that that batch would be completed, within that 72-hour time frame. Taking another pause for questions before we go on.
Hi, yes, we do have one question. WAN optimizers can be very helpful in some ASR bandwidth limited scenarios. Will we run the
Yeah,
throughput checks with that infrastructure in place?
go again on that question, Willie. Let me hear you. Let me
Uh,
make
would,
sure.
would we, I'll repeat it. WAN optimizers can be very helpful in some ASR bandwidth limited scenarios.
Yes.
Would we run the throughput checks with that infrastructure in place?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here's the thing. You ASR supports one optimizer, which is Riverbed, right? Um, Riverbed appliance add some additional compression of the data, which gives us, additional, about 75% compression. So that would help. So in an environment that uses Riverbed, we have had customers that have tested with other, one optimizers, but from a recommended point of view, ASR replication, Riverbed is a solution that we have tested with, and provide recommendation for.
Okay. And next question is, does this support VMware Workstation?
Yeah, so if you're, let's say you're testing, right, and you have VMware Workstation installed, yeah, it will work.
Okay. And that's all the questions for now.
Okay, all right. So another thing that the report produces for you is and this is very, very key, right? And the reason why it is important is that, okay, let me go back here because there's one thing that I missed. So one of the things that we did also as part of this report is that we put in what is called a growth factor consideration on your virtual machines. So even while profiling the virtual machines, we say, okay, what based on the information that we have found, add an additional 30% to that and use that as to provide this report. So even with generating this report, we are saying that this report gives you the prescriptive guidance, with the potential of a 30% growth, of your environment. The other thing is that we cap also your write IOPS and read IOPS percentile. The reason being is that, let's say your virtual machine is running hot because of a backup processor or something like that. We don't want to use that as guidance for whatever storage account or your peak IOPS, so to speak. What we then do is cap that at the 95 percentile, so we're not capturing those high peak scenarios. So again, we are giving you best practice guidance based on with some reserves, based into the reporting. The storage account placement is very, very important because from a performance point of view, there is a performance cap on standard storage and premium storage in Azure. Now, for a disk that is running in Azure storage account, the peak IOPS for that disk or the maximum IOPS for that disk, a P30 disk is 5,000. For VMs that run on a standard storage account or disk in a standard storage account, that peak IOPS is 500. So we need to have that type of information to help you determine where is the best place to place my workloads and the number of storage accounts that I'm going to need. So this is what this information tells you. So we look at your virtual machines and we see, based on the total read-write IOPS for those virtual machines and the write IOPS for those virtual machines, what type of storage account should we use? So in this case, we're saying that we're going to need the IOPS for your individual virtual machines fit in about the P10 range. They're not necessarily that high, but we're going to need standard storage, for those VMs. And then the reason why we're using, premium storage for those VMs, I should say, and the reason why we have those two standard storage accounts there is that the standard premium storage requires so standard storage accounts to write the logs for the virtual machines that sit in those premium storage accounts. Excuse me. Excuse me. My apologies. All right. So this piece is very, very important because we tell you this is your storage placement, and we're telling your virtual machines that you have, where should you place them? The standard machines, the standard storage machines, the machines that meet the IOPS of a standard storage account, what their name should be and where should you place them. And we return from a placement percent summary point of view, how many virtual machines will be placed in standard storage accounts, how many will be placed in in um, in premium storage accounts, and from a maximum capacity point of view also, what are the total number of virtual machines that you should place in any one standard storage account. Now, interestingly, this report returns that you could place your 84 virtual machines into a standard storage account. Now, the reason why it does this is because these machines particularly are low churn, low change virtual machines. Now, our general recommendation, from an Azure point of view, is not to place more than 40 virtual machines in any storage account, right? So just that you're aware on that. And then, from there, the last two things that we have is we give you a list of which identifies in the report what virtual machines meet the compatibility requirement. So we tell you what storage accounts it's placed in, the storage account name. We tell you the read-write IOPS from a growth factor point of view, with the growth factor included. So to be honest, these virtual machines are not changing highly. But importantly, we also tell you in this column what the virtual machine size will be when we fail over into Azure. So so if you're sizing also, if you're preparing a quotation or a costing for your customers as a, hey, when my workloads are running in Azure, you can take the information here, look at the virtual machine sizes, put the dollar value beside them, and you can tell them exactly, what DR will cost in a DR testing for them, when they fail over into Azure. Additionally, obviously, if you're pricing out ASR, you would need to know the protection costs for each virtual machine, and then your storage costs based on the amount of storage that we are consuming, and that information you can find on the storage placement point of view. Sorry. I want to quickly jump to the incompatible VM list, because this again is also very, very important. Here, what this shows you is the virtual machines that you cannot protect with ASR unless you make some changes to those virtual machines. So in this case, we have VM Win11, right? It has a disk size that is not supported because it's greater than 1 terabyte, right? And it's the same thing for VM Win22, right? So the case here is, so they have this SCSI disk here that is greater than the required size. So what you'd have to do, there are a number of things, there are potential things that you can do. So if the disk size is greater than a terabyte, you can do span disks, create multiple 1 terabyte disk at source, span that, create a span volume from those disks, copy the data into that span volume, and ASR will be able to visualize that, because each individual disk would be less than a terabyte. And this is just a workaround until we increase the disk sizes. And then for VM Win22, the issue with VM22 is that its peak IOPS is greater than what ASR supports. So typically, what Azure supports, I should say. So typically what happens in this scenario is that it might be something like a SQL server, right, with multiple SSD disk, or it might be, LUNs connected to your fiber channel array or something like that. So what you need to do in this scenario is look at the possibility of, say, okay, this might be a server that we want to use something like SQL Always On and extend that to Azure over a site-to-site VPN. And if you do that, ASR has what we call very specific deployment scripts that we can integrate your application into a SQL always on cluster. And, on the recovery side, we can, point back your application, to the database instance that are running in Azure. And then there are some scenarios also for a particular disk. The Azure storage account throughput is capped at 200 megabytes per second. So that is in that scenario, that might not be, obviously this is a workload that is not available for protection. And you might, consider, as I said, a workaround such as, doing a SQL always on availability group or something like that. Okay. So at a high level, this is the deployment planner report. I really recommend everybody to take the opportunity to go out and download it. I'll send a link, we can share that via email with you. But
we can post it in the Yammer community as well.
Yeah, sure, we'll do that. So I'll pause now for any final questions, and see, we can, just to be respectful of folks' time. I don't want to go over time.
Yeah, we do have a minute left here. So there were a couple questions that came in. So hopefully some people can stay to hear the answers to those questions. But in the meantime, just want to say thanks for joining the May Partner Community Call. Look forward to the announcements regarding the June community call and topics for that. If you have any topics that are top of mind that come up, please shoot an email to myself. You can reach me at wimaul at Microsoft.com, or just post it to the Yammer community. All right. Here are the questions that came in. Does the planner have the ability to determine the cost based on the latest MSRP price list?
I get that question all the way. No, it doesn't. And that's a very good question, to be honest. There's a preview tool coming out called Azure Migrate that will help you with some of that type of information. I'll share the link with you, Willie, and you can pass it out to the rest of the team. Right? It's kind of a workaround way to get that information. But the Azure Migrate tool will kind of help you, with that.
Gotcha. Okay. Couple of questions here. Will the planner work with, I know we talked about VMware today, but will the planner work with Hyper-V and or physical servers?
Right. So it will work with Hyper-V, and let's be honest, we start with VMware first because VMware is more pervasive than Hyper-V. Just talking the truth, it's a fact. And, most of our customers are running VMware. But the product group is working on a solution for Hyper-V. Physicals, no, because the mere fact is, the solution doesn't run directly against a workload. It's reading information from the hypervisor. So you can run. You have tools such as diskperf that can get that information for you for a physical machine, and then you can plug that. You can use that information to determine whether or not this is a workload that's protectable in Azure.
Okay, thanks. And last question is, does the tool support manage this?
Not as yet.
Not as yet. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
As soon as ASR supports, does ASR support replicating to manage this? I think that's a question, right?
Let me see.
I think that would be the question because managed disk is an ASR, is an Azure component or Azure, feature.
Mm-hmm.
So ASR doesn't replicate the managed disk as yet, but that is something that the product group is working on. look out for some announcement post the end of June.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we do know manage this makes the deployment simpler. No need to create any storage account, all that crazy stuff.
Great. Well, that's all the questions that we have. I definitely want to say a big thank you to you, Ron. This is great information for our partners as well. Um, Again, this information, the slides, as well as the recording will be posted to our Yammer community, and I'll make sure that we get the links that Ron mentioned on the Yammer community as well. Thanks for your
Absolutely.
time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.